countries decline either because they lose wars or they get buried under their own debt. And the countries slowly calcify. They get special interests who lock in their special favors. And under the weight of that accumulated commitments, they sometimes collapse. So you look historically, you have to think that the debt is our single biggest problem as we go forward for decades and for generations. If the supercommittee fails, we either get some kind of sequester, and then there's one or two options. One is we fudge it. They find a way to get around the commitments, and we just go on in the status quo, which is to build up debt after debt. And the second is we have a bunch of dumb cuts, which cut the just and the unjust alike, including things like the Defense Department. And for example, in that case, you cut things without any strategic vision, without any sense of what sort of security threats you're going to face, what kind of wars you want to fight, and you just do it blindly, and that can't be a good option. Yeah, the problem is not short-term. The problem is one of functionality. Can the government actually solve its problems? Governability. In the 1970s, people had the sense that New York was ungovernable. Giuliani somewhat turned that around. I think people have the sense that Washington is ungovernable, and that the debt is really a symptom of that. And that goes to a deeper problem, that the country itself is not governable, which is to say people simply want more government than they're willing to pay for. And whatever good intentions a president or a speaker or a Senate majority leader come into office with, they're working with a country that simply won't face the consequences of its choices. And so you have to make some progress just to underline the basic fact that the country is governable, that the people will accept the consequences of those choices. They're willing to pay for the benefits they want to receive. I do think a go big approach is easier than a go small approach. If you're going to just nickel and dime things, you get one interest versus another, or you get one interest strongly committed to defeating whatever you're going to do. If you go big, and the obvious model is the 1986 tax reform, then you got all the interests competing against each other. And I think paradoxically it's easier for members of Congress to resist the cries of a million angry interest groups as opposed to the cries of one really angry interest groups. And if you go big, you marshal public opinion, which senses that we've got to make some big changes. You basically win over the people who want simplicity in our tax code and in our budget. And if people are willing to say, hey, everyone's taking a hit, I think they're going to be a lot more willing to go along with you than if they say, I'm taking a hit, but he's not going to take a hit. One of the big factors preventing us from having any sort of debt solution is the American people figure that if we start cutting, they're the ones who are going to get screwed, and somebody else is not going to be. And so if you can spread the pain around with a big approach, I think it's just politically a lot easier than a small approach. If Barack Obama and John Boehner got together and had a grand bargain, and they even got members of the Tea Party, members of the Republican caucus, to be honest, I think it's an open question whether the country would be there. I think you go to some parts of the country, and people have a real awareness that we're spending too much, and they're willing to support politicians willing to take tough choices. I think if you go to New Jersey, it's a Democratic state, they've got a Republican governor, but I think the people of New Jersey are basically aware they've got to accept some cuts. If you go to other parts of the country, namely California, I'm not sure that mentality is there. They understand their state is really messed up, but I'm not sure they're willing to tolerate the measures necessary to make it acceptable. So I'd love to think that if Washington got together, the country would rally behind. I think it's very much an open question. And so I think aside from doing a deal, you have to do an education campaign. You have to have a president in particular who's willing to go on TV with charts and show what the facts are. Now, the president and his speechwriters and advisors hate the idea of getting up there with a bunch of charts. They think he's too professorial. We don't want to play into that stereotype. But the fact is, if you're going to shake some misperceptions the country has about the debt situation, you need the facts, you need the charts, you just got to lay it out in front of them. Franklin Roosevelt laid out the bad military situation in the beginning of World War II. I think the president, whoever it is, has to lay out the bad debt situation. I think the simple formula is take away from the affluent elderly and give to the young and struggling. We've got a giant redistribution machine that directs money to the affluent elderly, and we've got to reverse that. And I think one of the problems is that on the Democratic side, you have Democrats want to tie benefits to the affluent to benefits to the middle class. On the Republican side, they want to tie tax cuts for the affluent to tax cuts for the middle class. So both see a political advantage in tying one side up and down the income stream. And I think we essentially have to break that on both sides. Republicans have to be willing to give on taxes for the affluent, and Democrats have to be willing to cut benefits for the affluent. And that's more or less what we have to do. So I would look to the affluent elderly as the place to do the most cutting. I'm a little less concerned about Social Security. The Republican debate is now obsessed with it. But it's a problem, but it's a manageable problem. The growth of Medicare is the entire spread of the debt over the next couple decades. Obviously, we're having this big debate about what's causing the deficits right now, and you can say the Bush tax cuts, unpaid wars, things like that. But if you look over the longer term, it's a very simple answer. It's Medicare. That's really responsible for almost everything. And so dealing with Medicare and the broader healthcare system is really the key to that. And the president thinks he's dealt with it or begun to deal with it. As part of the healthcare plan, I tend not to think so, and I think most health economists think the costs were not brought under control. And so Medicare is the 80% of the story of what we're talking about. Like everyone else, there are parts of Bull Simpson I didn't particularly like, but it's what we got. And I think it's the best that we are probably going to get in any sort of bipartisan negotiation. If you look at Bull Simpson and other things, there was something called the Bipartisan Policy Center had a plan. Various other people have come up with bipartisan plans, and they tend to congregate around similar ideas that Bull Simpson came up with. And so, we could all imagine something better, but given the reality that you have to have something bipartisan, I think what they and the Senate gangs are trying to work on is what we got, and it's probably the best vehicle to move forward. I guess I have doubts the political system is up to the task. I think it's worth trying. I'm glad the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget is trying. I think they're among the leaders in trying. Pete Peterson is trying. A lot of people are trying. But right now, I'm just pessimistic. I just think we're going to have a crack-up. We're going to have something really terrible happen, and then we'll get serious. And the crack-up may be as bad as Greece, maybe worse than Greece. We're certainly a lot bigger than Greece. So I guess I count myself among the pessimists who think we'll deal with this problem until we're absolutely forced to.